Please be seated. As we begin our time together, hear these words from Psalm 40. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, or the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with a tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city, it shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in uproar, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Amen. Today we come to honor and to remember Colonel Charlie Chuck Pat Gillespie. We have several people here today who will help us to remember his 90 years of life. His son Mark from Texas will offer a eulogy. His stepson Chuck from Ireland and grandson Anthony will offer some short family remembrances. And finally, Chuck's friend and pastor of many years, Dr. Gary Furr, our pastor emeritus, will provide a message. These men will help us to celebrate Chuck's many accomplishments as a family man, as an Air Force person, as a businessman. 30 years in the Air Force, 30 years as a vice president of a company. And yet it's only in my short year as Chuck's pastor that I discovered what I see as probably Chuck's greatest and expansive gift of life, his love. My dad once told me that the secret to a purposeful life is to love and be loved. Beyond all of his professional accomplishments, Chuck's ability to love and be loved defined his life. It's why all of us are here for a 90-year-old. We haven't forgotten his life because he's lived it so beautifully in front of us. I met Chuck last spring as the boyfriend of one of my longtime family friends, Miss LaRue Spites. And in my first days as pastor, while boxes were still in my office, here come LaRue and Chuck, asking me to wonder if we could do a wedding here in the church one Sunday after church. I said, I've never seen it done like that, but I think we can. I still remember the giggles they had as they were gathered in my office. Newlywed love. As I've gotten to know Chuck over the last year, we've had the chance to talk about his life and his family that have covered these 90 years. He's told me about his deep love for his children, both his biological children and his stepchildren, that all were his children, all of his grandchildren, how much he loved each one of you so deeply. Last week, LaRue called to tell me that she wanted me to come over and pray with Chuck. I didn't quite know what all was going on, but Chuck had made the decision to enter into hospice. And while we were together around his bed, his deep love for all of us, and especially for all of you, flowed out. He expressed his love for you, LaRue, his newlywed wife. And then he spoke to his children, those that were there, and to all of those who weren't. And I still remember from the last words I heard him say, I love you. What a great gift from a father to his family. To love and to be loved is the fulfillment of a wonderful life, something that we all can strive for in our lives. Chuck lived a great and marvelous life, and today we come to mourn that loss because we have experienced that love. We will miss him. I can speak of all of us today that while Chuck was 90 years old, this day comes too quickly. He lived life fully, he loved deeply, and he was still making plans for his future. And then his body quickly and unexpectedly decided that was enough. So today, as we gather as we sing these hymns, as we say these prayers, as we hear these memories, may all of us find strength as we mourn together. May the presence of God be with us as we remember the faith that held him strong and the faith that brings us today to worship, to know that this life is not over. There's more beyond, not only for Chuck as he moves into the life beyond, but for all of us for whom his gift still lives. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, you are the center of our lives, the carrier of our hope. We pray as we worship today that your presence will be known to us as we remember Chuck Gillespie, as we remember the stories of how he loved us as a father, as a grandfather, as a husband, as a friend. Help us, O Lord, to remember those incredible stories of his playfulness, of his laughter, of his kindness, of his generosity. Enable us, O Lord, today to be brave in our remembering, honest in our sorrow, and open in our love and compassion for one another. Give us the patience to mourn and to grieve, and allow us to remember with joy the gift of life, the person that you gave us in Chuck Gillespie. We pray these things now in the name of Christ. Amen. Let me invite Chuck Tarter now and Anthony to come and to share.
Thank you, Eric. Those are beautiful words you shared, and I can't add to that. But I do want to invite you to join me in further celebrating Chuck Gillespie. My wife commanded me from on high not to preach. I'm a preacher, so this is on video. Honey, you'll know I respected your wishes. Not going to preach. I'm going to do what I was told, which is to stick to the script, which is the celebration of the man. And there's a lot to be said. Protector, provider, super dresser. As Eddie reminded me, super scooper. As a ladies' man, he scooped up my mother off the dance floor and scooped up LaRue, I think, at the Sunday school fellowship hall, maybe. I'm not sure. But he knew how to work his angles. He loved life, didn't he? He wanted to live. My last conversation with him on FaceTime was, I want to live to 105, Chuck. He had a target date. Is that Chuck Gillespie or what? I want 15 more years. I said, I'm praying for you. Prayed for him every day, and I prayed for you, LaRue. You came into my prayers every day as well. He was a father to the fatherless, my family. He was a grandfather to those that didn't have fathers. Just had a conversation with Connor Stone outside, and he said, and Lois were both remarking on how he became like a grandfather to Connor. And that was Chuck Gillespie. He was a tender man. What a tender heart. And those of you that I don't know here in this church family know this about him, probably to a certain extent. He was a lot of fun. And yes, he could be stern, Gary, that's for sure. I saw that side as well. And the children, I'm sure, experienced that authoritative figure that he was, but always the family man, wasn't he? His grandfather was from Donegal, and I remember when he came to Ireland for my wedding, he was determined to drag my mother to Donegal, which is not an easy drive. And my mother said she wasn't going, and I said, if you're not going, I'm going, because she was terrified of the Irish roads. But he was determined, and he was going to get up there because he wanted to connect with his roots. He loved his church family. He was a man of conscience, as has already been said. If there was a right thing to do, he would do it. And if there wasn't a clear path, he would find it to do the right thing. I loved him deeply. I'll miss him deeply, as I know you will as well. And lastly, he will love this analogy. You may find it difficult, but I went back and forth on this, but he was a beast. He was an animal, as we say in our language. He could work, couldn't he? Man, that guy could work. Grief is an intruder. It comes unannounced. It's not welcome, but it's what we have to go through to deal with the loss of him. I depended on him too much. And I have regrets. I regret that I didn't come sooner. I didn't follow my gut and get on a plane sooner. But that's what grief does. It brings up all the things that you want to feel, but you can't feel them all at the same time. So take your time. This is the beginning, as Eric's already said, to celebrate. And lastly, I'll just say to you that Chuck was a man of faith. When I knew him, he had faith. But as I got to know him, I realized more and more that he had a relationship with Jesus Christ, a faith relationship that made our relationship sweet. Thank you for Chuck Gillespie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today to celebrate my grandfather, who we grandchildren and great-grandchildren affectionately knew as Pop-Pop. Today I'm going to share with you a version of a letter that I was able to read with him the day before he passed just a few days ago. Pop, first off, I love you. These 3 words are significant because many men of your generation don't have the courage to say them, but you said them often. You taught your children to say them, and they taught me. I can't recall a time that we said goodbye that we haven't said this to one another. And so I want to start with that. I love you, Pop. I think I speak for all of us, your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, that you have made a tremendous impact on our lives and have been formative to who we are in this world. As the first grandchild of many in our family, I was named after both my grandfathers, actually. Anthony, from my dad's side, Charles, from my mom's side, Volgaritas, and I'm very proud of this name. I didn't have the chance to grow up with my paternal grandfather, Tony Volgaritas, as he was known, though I know he is in me too. He passed when I was only 3, and my father was only 29. Hearing how you talked about him to me with the highest regard assures me that he was also a great man. If you said that, it must have been true. It must have really been true. And for the last 41 years of my life, you have been there. You have loved us, forming relationships with each of us. But more importantly, you have served as an example for us. An example on how to live one's life. You've taught us the meaning of family. As I was going through old pictures this week, I was amazed, though not surprised, to see images of you with your own children playing a game of football in the front yard, sprawled out on the floor with your feet propped up, napping with your kids as they used you as a pillow, or gazing down in awe as you held a newborn baby in your arms. Though these images were from a different generation, long before I was born, they were familiar. You've been there, present in each of us, for each of us, for so much of your life. You've been an example of commitment, generosity, and service. You're committed to your country, an esteemed career in the military, a colonel, I might add, as evidenced by the stoic portrait that hung in the basement that all us grandkids always looked at. To the Air Force garrison caps I always remember trying on as a kid, Marks too. And though, of course, your unmissable license plate that just said Colonel. I've heard stories from LaRue and others about your service to your church, this church, committed to being here each week, your commitment to Sunday school class, serving as a friend for those who need you, or even serving those in need who didn't know you. And finally, you've been committed to us. You've been an example of how to handle adversity, including how to handle grief. With the loss of Honey, Luke and your sisters, and many friends and family you've known, each time you were there to support, selflessly giving, but also being a source of strength for all who needed you. And you've been an example of how to carry oneself with style. Kelsey and I were joking over text that you had a fashion sense that other men in this family could only envy. On special occasions like New Year's or graduations, you would be dressed to the nines in a sharp blazer, a tie, and that signature matching handkerchief. You always bragged that you had the same 32-inch waist for the last 75 years since the Air Force. Every time. There was the red convertible and the white Mercedes and the red truck with the pinstripe. You were always the first on the dance floor, willing to bust out a move. In my early memories, you pulled off a cowboy hat, boots, and a cigar. That was the signature pop-up look for much of our childhood. My personal favorite was when you grew out that silver hair and beard, Jerry Garcia style. Man, that silver wavy hair, I am thankful for that hair. My brother too. You epitomize cool, always so sharp. And finally, you've been an example of how to love, how to make the most of this life, and how to seize the moment. It could be appreciating the little things, whether the joy of ice cream at the end of each day, or baking a pecan pie and sharing it with the family. You always made me feel special. Happy birthday messages, my absolute favorite. A full-throated, in tune, I might add, message reliably each year. I still have many of them saved on my phone. You would give your full attention to each of us, hearing out the many updates in our lives, following along with a gee whiz, or well, I'll be darned, or the infamous, how about that? Even within 24 hours of your passing, you whispered to me, I'm so proud of you. I love you. Now, I've been to my share of weddings, but I must say the most recent one, yours to your amazing partner, LaRue, in this very sanctuary was the most special and inspiring. Once again, you, along with LaRue, taught us what it is to love. That at any moment, at any age, it is possible to capture joy in life. You said as much at your wedding. You said, it was right here, he said, I don't know how long we have together, but life isn't over yet, and we want to spend every moment we have left together. And LaRue, I know Pop-Up was happy at the end of his life, and I'm so thankful for your relationship and for you. Pop, you lived an inspiring life, and you must know that your example, your legacy, your character, and your values will continue on through me and through all of us here who have loved you. Love you, Pop.
Join me in singing the beautiful hymn, Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound, number 587 in your hymnals, and we will sing that all 5 verses.
was great. Eric, thank you. Chuck Tarter, thank you. Anthony, thank you, bud. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. Eric, you said something, to love and be loved. I love that. Thank you for sharing those words. My name is Mark Gillespie. I'm Chuck's son, the second of 4 children. My sisters are Brenda, the oldest, Sarah, and Julie. You know, death is inevitable. It's an event we know will come, yet is something that we rarely prepare for. I spoke to Dad on Sunday the 6th, just several days ago, after he had been released from rehab and he sounded great. He was at home with LaRue. He asked me to come and see him and I told him that I'd be there as soon as possible. I arrived Tuesday at noon, and I was not prepared for what I saw when I arrived. Dad was in pain. He had declined significantly in just 2 days. Within 39 hours, he was gone. Several of us were by his side, and that was the most valuable 39 hours I spent in my life. What a blessing. So here on today, I will refer to my dad as Chuck. Dad, please forgive me. There were many sides of Chuck: the colonel, the executive vice president, the friend, the church member, and the family man. You all experienced one, several, or all sides of Chuck. The colonel. Chuck was a consummate professional. He loved the Air Force, and he loved the work that he did. He was a computer systems development officer, and he distinguished himself throughout his career as one of the early pioneers and architects of automated data processing and information management systems for the Air Force and the Department of Defense. As he progressed in his career, he was responsible for managing, implementing, and modernizing of global Department of Defense information systems. I've been told by Dad's peers and subordinates that his work and abilities were unparalleled, and he was known as the best combat-ready data automator. He was a great leader, manager, problem solver, and communicator. We kids remember Dad staying up late at night, every night, doing office work well beyond midnight. Then he'd get up, go to work early, many times before 5 a.m., and he would repeat that 5-6 days a week. Dad had been in the service nearly 29 years when he was assigned to Headquarters Air Force at the Pentagon. He had toyed with the idea of retiring, so he enrolled in a career transition class for personnel looking to transition from military to civilian life. This class spoke to him, and he made the decision to pull the plug, or punch out, and retire effective April of 1983. He was very excited about pursuing a career in the civilian workplace. The executive vice president. After retiring from the Air Force in 1983, he went to work as an executive vice president for Computer Data Systems Incorporated, CDSI, a well-known Beltway bandit specializing in information technology and software development, catering largely to government agencies. CDSI was bought out by Affiliated Computer Service Incorporated of Dallas, and Dad remained on as an executive vice president. He was responsible for bidding for multi-million-dollar contracts and overseeing the implementation of those contracts. He loved his work and the team of professionals that he built and worked close with. For the next 20 years, he continued his routine of late nights and early mornings, combined with travel, presentations, RFP development, contract reviews, bid submissions, client meetings, and planning sessions. He retired from ACS in 2002, and since his retirement from the corporate world, he remained close with many of his civilian work family. As a civilian, Dad loved dressing up for his job. He was an impeccable dresser, as evidenced by his suits, sport coats, suspenders, cuffed slacks, kerchiefs, and cufflinks. He even rocked it when he wasn't at work. I've never known anyone that could look so good at a barbecue. In fact, Joseph A. Bank loved Chuck Gillespie. Chuck the friend. I cannot imagine anyone not liking Chuck. Whenever I was out in public with Dad, whether it be a military event, luncheon, work event, whatever, people of all ages, races, and work levels would go out of their way and seek me out and tell me what an amazing mess. What an amazing man. Boss, co-worker that he was. At times, it literally choked me up to hear their praise for him, as it's doing now. And it made my chest fill with pride. Growing up, we moved all over: Illinois, Japan, Texas, Michigan, Ohio, Alabama, Virginia. My sisters and I made many friends, and of course, our friends would meet our parents. I know for some, especially Brenda's friends, it could have been a harrowing experience because Dad was intimidating. He had this look, flat top haircut, military grade, black horn-rimmed glasses, and that natural scowl or frown, which did not go away until years later, but he had that. But his look did not scare them off. All of our friends fell in love with Dad, and they admired him tremendously. Just the other day, I spoke to a close friend of mine from high school, Billy Irriga. Some of you know Billy. He was a great athlete. We played ball together at Lee High School. He told me a story about Dad that he says he'll never forget. I've never heard this story before. He said he laughs whenever he thinks about it, so it had to have been funny. He said, "Mark, your dad was driving us to a baseball game in that white station wagon, and as soon as we started driving, he turned around, and he had this serious look on his face, and he told me and the others in the car with him, 'Buckle your seatbelt.' That's the first time anyone told me to buckle my seatbelt, so I did," and he just laughed. But that was Dad. I've never known Dad to say anything negative about anyone. Well, except maybe President or MSNB. Never mind. A person's race, nationality, or religion didn't matter to Dad. He saw everyone as an equal. And maybe that is why he gained so much respect from so many people from all walks of life. We could learn so much from his example, and I know God was so very pleased. Chuck in the church. We grew up as United Methodists. We all went to church and Sunday school, dressed up in our Sunday best. As a family, church was important, but we were not an outwardly religious or spiritual family. Dad told me once that when he was in college attending Bradley University, he seriously considered going into the seminary, so I knew there was a seed inside of Dad that may one day blossom. I know Dad became actively involved with Vestavia Hills after marrying Betty, and he loved coming here. Over time, he became more actively involved in church events and activities such as Sunday school, serving meals, prayer chain, greeter, etc. One thing he really enjoyed was the golf cart shuttle service. Chuck the family man. This is where I know Chuck the best, the family man, the head of our household. Dad was married to my mom, Geraldine, or Jerry, for 37 years. We lived in a very loving home, and they modeled marriage and parenting very well for us kids. Although Dad was a workaholic, and we moved every 3 and 4 years, he was a constant presence in our lives, whether it be as a scoutmaster, coaching baseball and basketball, going to ball games, helping with our homework and school projects, or teaching us how to ride bikes and drive. Oh boy. Life became very interesting and tense when he was teaching Brenda to drive. Most summers, we would pack the station wagon and drive to Illinois to visit our grandparents and relatives. Peoria for Dad, East St. Louis for my mom. We had many great memories of those vacations, and we would frequently go to drive-in theaters in our 1960 red Chevy station wagon. As we got older, Dad introduced us to camping, which we all enjoyed. He taught us to love and respect the outdoors and to live under the stars, make a campfire, cook s'mores, and roast marshmallows. Dad was somewhat of a disciplinarian. When we were younger, of course we'd disobey. We'd get spanked. When we got older, we'd be placed on restriction. Sometimes I'd get my mouth washed out with soap. We had curfews, and we didn't want to bust those. However, I think Brenda thought it was a game. Brenda was known to test mom's and dad's patience, but me, I recall a few whacks, but I learned by watching Big Sis. I don't think Sarah and Julie ever got spanked. Talk about a two-tiered justice system. From 1967 to 70, we lived in Upper Arlington, Ohio. Dad was teaching ROTC at Ohio State. In 70, we moved across town to Gahanna, where Dad was transferred to a Department of Defense job at the Defense Construction Supply Center in Columbus, Ohio. Brenda was a junior, and I was a year behind her. And as you can imagine, dress and style are very important for young teenage girls. And Brenda was no exception. I vividly recall Dad measuring Brenda's dresses from the hem to the knee, and arguments would ensue on a daily basis. I thought we would never get past those days. In 73, Dad got orders to move to Gunter Air Force Station in Alabama to work at the Data Systems Design Center. He and Mom built a house right outside the back gate of Gunter. Brenda and I were in high school, Sarah middle school, Julie 4th or 5th grade. As I recall, we had to strap Brenda to the Plymouth station wagon to get her out of Ohio because she did not want to leave. We made the move, and we all acclimated to our new surroundings. Brenda and I started school at Robert E. Lee in Montgomery. She was a senior, I was a junior. As I recall, Brenda really didn't date until Montgomery, which was probably a good thing. This is when we all saw for the first time the fighting warrior come out in Dad. It was interesting, to say the least, especially when a tall, tan, hairy, muscular young man who was a spitting image of Tony Orlando, wearing short cut-off jeans, a tank top shirt, he pulls in our driveway and gets out. At that very moment, our world changed. Lewis, Dad accepted and loved you. Because you took care of this precious little girl. Thank you. You both moved on to Auburn, where Dad would pay surprise visits from time to time to make sure Brenda was doing okay and following the rules. Sarah and Julie were the perfect children. They learned from their best big sister. We all made it through high school and college. Sarah meets and marries Ron. Julie meets and marries Lance. And Dad could not be any more proud. Grandkids began to appear, and Dad was so happy. Dad was a tremendous grandfather, and great memories were made with all of them. Mom and Dad divorced around 92, and in 93, we surprised Dad with a surprise 60th birthday party at the Holiday Inn in Birmingham. A dance group was there, and Lewis and I were generously passing out birthday cake to anyone that would take a piece. A beautiful blonde stepped forward. She asked who was the birthday boy, and we pointed Dad out to her. When she saw Dad, she immediately wanted to meet him. A love story was being created right before our eyes. Dad literally swept her off the dance floor, courted her, and they were married months later. We came into a blended family, Chuck, Roddy, Eddie, and tons, literally tons, of Betty's relatives, brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews. Betty's family embraced every one of us in such a loving and caring way. Dad treated Chuck, Eddie, Roddy as his own flesh and blood. He loved those boys, and they loved him. Betty died in July of 2019, and her death was very hard on Dad. That was really the first time I'd ever seen Dad become emotional. First time. Following Betty's death, Dad turned to the church family here at Vestavia. It was then that church became much more important to him. That seed began to sprout. He loved his Sunday school, the new wine class. He helped on work days at the church. He made and took pies to the shelter. He also served as a greeter. It was 2 years after Betty's death that Dad would tell us about a woman that he met at church and that he enjoyed speaking with. He met her for coffee and pie a few times, and they would talk for hours. We were glad to hear this because we knew he was alone. Dad would tell us he was worried about being seen with another woman or having feelings because of what others might think. We told him to heck with what others think. It took him a while to lose that apprehension, but he did. He and LaRue began to date, and well, many of you know the rest of the story. They were married in October of 2022, and Dad was so happy and so very much in love. They began to travel some and made plans to travel more and as often as they could. We looked forward to blending with LaRue's precious family. LaRue, in such a short period of time, you pumped new life into Dad. You made him extremely happy and gave him so much hope for the future. When God created Dad, he literally threw away the mold. Dad was one of a kind. He was a priceless treasure. Dad prepared us for the world. He taught us values, respect, work ethic, to set goals, to be honest, and to never give up. Dad was the perfect man and the perfect father. Everything he did to perfection. Everyone he met, he left his mark with them. He was loyal, trustworthy, honest, selfless, and a true gentleman. He kept chivalry alive. Despite his success, he never once called attention to himself or wanted the limelight. He was the most humble and giving man. He was a true and faithful servant. Lewis, Ron, and Lance, you each made Dad so happy for being great husbands, fathers, providers, and protectors. And Cheryl, Dad loved you and thought you were so amazing. Gary, I'm not going to leave you out of this. I want you to know that Dad has told me on several occasions that you had such a positive impact on his life, and he loved you very much. Thank you. Brendan, Sarah, thanks for being with Dad the way you have these last 6 weeks. It's been hard on you, I know. Each one of us have been impacted in a positive way by Chuck Gillespie. Thank you for being here today to honor such an incredible man. I'd like to thank Gary, Eric, the Vestavia Hills Baptist Church and congregation for embracing Dad. Dad loved it here. Thank you for lifting him up in your prayers. And in addition, on behalf of my family, I'd like to thank you for your prayers for my son Luke, who passed away. September of last year. And finally, to my Father in heaven, Dad, thank you for your love, your devotion, your commitment to all of us. You are so pleasing to God. You've been my hero for my life and my best friend. And I love you. Give our best to Luke. Love you, man.
What wonderful remembrances these have been. I did love your father. From the time he and Betty showed up around here, and each of them in their own unique way made their presence known, and wanted to read this passage of Scripture in closing from Philippians 4. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. There's your commission. You've been blessed. You know, I'm going to do something I've never done in a funeral, and that is to start by going back to the wedding. And I remember telling that the first time I was with Chuck and LaRue together was in this chapel back here at a grief service. And Chuck was over there, and LaRue was over here, and they got through that. But he came to me not long after that and said, I want to talk to you about something. And I said, okay. And he said, well, I've been noticing this lady LaRue, and I admire her a lot. I think she has such depth and such quality, and I like that. And I would like to maybe go have coffee or something, and do you think that's okay? And I said, well, since both of you are in your 80s, I think it's probably all right. And I don't know that you need to ask me that, but you know, and then there came this wedding. It was really something. And when they asked me about getting married, they said, we're thinking about this, and what do you think? And kind of reminded me of that story when Andy Griffith was leaving Barney in charge, and he got 3 people to be deputies, and one of them was old Judd. And he said, you think you can make a deputy out of him? He's in his 80s. And Barney said, I'll whip him into shape. And he said, well, you better hurry. And so my thought was, okay, if y'all are going to do this, you better get on with it. Life is short. But I want to tell you what happened. I did give them one premarital counseling session, but I thought maybe they knew. But I observed that as they approached getting married, they were very somber and serious about this. They really wanted their family to be okay. They really wanted everybody to understand how happy they were. And so they weren't like giddy teenagers. They wanted companionship because it had been a hard journey for both of them. They had had love and they had lost, and now the possibility of having it again. But I pick up this story because they did it backwards. After they got married, they became giddy teenagers. And I mean, the whole church was kind of like, you know, can you beat that? I mean, they are just having the time of their lives. Now, what is better about that? And I have a bit of a theory about that because you've heard this description of how much responsibility this man carried in his life, how he was a caretaker and caregiver, and one who shouldered the responsibility for whatever he did. He was good to everyone. He would come see me often. It would be after prayer breakfast because we'd both be there, and he'd call me the day before. He said, Pastor, it'd be all right if I come by and talk with you. Yeah, I'll be okay. And I knew he had something on his mind, and so we'd talk about different things. This is how I know about all of you, because if he was worried about something for you, we'd sit and talk. I knew your name, knew what you were going through, or what you were facing, or what test you had the next day, or what trial you were passing through in your life. And you found your way onto the prayer list. You were prayed for. And in that time, he really did always know what it meant to tread through a road with rocky places. He had plenty of those in his life, as we all do. And he did it so well. But then, little by little, as you've also heard, you begin to realize there was this deeper place, always moving along. And I saw it all those times that we talked together. One of them I remember particularly well. It was during the pandemic, because after we met, he called me that evening and said he had tested positive and he wanted to let me know. I didn't get it, remarkably. But I remember it because if something burdened him enough to come talk to me, he was holding it so deep in his heart. He prayed, and he was learning to pray. He was growing in prayer. And so here was this man who had been through all this challenge and difficulty and achievement and important things and strenuous things. But in this last little while, after all of that, for 9 months, he got to be like a little child again. And he played, and he was happy. And Jesus told us once that if you want to know what heaven's like, get around children, because adults have pretty well lost it. That heaven looks like children. And he was moving in that direction, reconnecting with that deep place that we know best as children without guile. And he was ready when his body gave out and done. He was ready to walk and trust right into that place. He grew all of his life spiritually. I saw glimpses all along. But in this last little while, it became more and more one full of growth and joy and the Spirit. You know, it strikes me that in this little passage, Paul is saying there are a couple of things that you ought to go about in your life. And one is to look at all the things worth doing and do them. And do them over and over again, and practice them again. And set an example, seek to be an example, and find and follow someone's example that's worth imitating. And if you do all of this, you'll have the peace of God. Follow Jesus. Do what Jesus did. Paul said, I've been trying to do that. Try to do what I've been doing. And somewhere along the way, it'll click in for you, and you'll get it, and you'll suddenly be doing it without having to try so hard. And there it'll be. I'm pretty sure that's what Paul had in mind. And in the Philippian church, he loved that church maybe better than any other because there were so many people there like that. They just looked for the thing that needed to be done, and they did it. And that's what Chuck was like. He was like a song that Guy Clark, the late songwriter, wrote called Stuff That Works. It says, I like stuff that works, stuff that holds up, the kind of stuff you don't hang on the wall, stuff that's real, stuff you feel, the kind of stuff you reach for when you fall. It's there. And so, of all the great and glorious things that he says there, I can do all things, whatsoever things are true, let this mind be on you, and all those other things, there's this simple verse. Just keep doing the things you've learned and received and heard and seen, and the God of peace will be with you. Otherwise, you're always going against everything that's going to give you peace in life. But when you go with those things, it's there. And that's what Chuck, I think, kept finding. He was growing and watching and learning to the end of his life. He told me enough of his life story and the people in it to marvel at how steadfast his heart was and dependable his soul. But he also never lost his curiosity, his desire to grow. Some people, it gets stomped out and they never get it back. This hunger to grow and be more than what you found so far. And if there's trouble, just ask, how can I help? It was a beautiful life, a wonderful man, not a perfect one, but real. A life that worked, a life that held up others, and built things that mattered. On LaRue's birthday, I posted on Facebook that you were blessed. You had been truly loved twice, and you knew it. For Chuck's family today, I say you were blessed. He set an example, and he sought to be an example to you. And he was an example worth imitating. So go do these things, and the peace of God in Christ will be with you. Amen.
Let's conclude with one final hymn, The Solid Rock, hymn number 590. Please stand as we sing all 4 verses. And now as we go, O Lord, may the gift of Chuck Gillespie live in our lives so that we may be more like you by knowing him. May the peace of Christ be with us, surpassing all understanding, giving us hope in the challenges of grief. And may the joy of your love be in our faces, bringing joy and hope and playfulness to all the places around us, so that our lives may grow more deeply and more beautiful each and every day. In Christ's name we pray.